Well, good evening, everybody. What a great crowd. It really is. And I have to tell you, welcome. Glad to have you here. I will tell you, a few minutes ago, out in the lobby, a couple of people asked me, they said, is it okay to bring your drink in here? And I said, listen, if the sheriff doesn't do anything about it, it's okay with me. My name is Rick Mullaney. I'm the director of the Public Policy Institute here at Jacksonville University. And welcome to tonight's program. Welcome to the forum. We are very, very glad to have you here. And I will be introducing them in a few more minutes in more detail. But I want to have, of course, a special welcome for the State Attorney for the 4th Judicial Circuit, Angela Corey, the Sheriff for Duval County, John Rutherford, the Public Defender for the 4th Judicial Circuit, Matt Shirk, and Circuit Judge Henry Davis. Thank you all for being with us. We have a very outstanding program planned for you tonight. And to kick off the program, I'd like to introduce somebody who is responsible for bringing the CEO and president of PepsiCo, Indra Nooyi, to campus last week. And that is a 1981 graduate of Jacksonville University who was both an athlete and a scholar while he was here, then went on to get his MBA, and then unfortunately did not stay in North Florida, but for the next 30 years, worked for Fortune 100 companies in Philadelphia and in the Northeast, at Bristol Myers Squibb, Pfizer, PepsiCo, one of the top people for Indra Nooyi, why she came here. And during that time in corporate America for Fortune 100 companies, began to develop a skill set working in mergers and acquisitions, capital markets, crisis management, marketing, communications, and always had a great love for Jacksonville University on the Board of Trustees until they approached him and said, we would like for you to consider coming back to Jacksonville to be the president of this university. Came here just about 2 years ago. If you take a look at this campus right now with over $25 million in capital projects coming out of the ground, the acquisition of 40 acres of riverfront property to the south, the building of the dorms north, this is the most exciting and dynamic time in the 80-year history of Jacksonville University. And I'm very pleased to introduce to you the president of Jacksonville University, Tim Cost.
Thank you. Welcome to our esteemed panelists. I'll be very brief so we can get at the subject tonight. Thank you for that nice introduction, Rick. Two thoughts for you tonight as we get started. One, I think the Public Policy Institute is one of the real shining stars of Jacksonville University. Under Rick's leadership, he's not only put together a stellar board, and please check out the board that is supporting this Public Policy Institute. It's as good as anything that I've had the opportunity to work with in my 30-some-odd years in corporate America. And second, the university itself, as Rick mentioned, is in the middle of an aggressive renaissance. This was an incredible place when I was here from 77 to 81, and it's great to be back. Arlington has changed since I left, just a little, and we feel very, very strongly about digging in Arlington. We're not going anywhere. We're investing in Arlington. We're investing in this campus. As Rick said, we've added to it. And intellectually, this university ought to be a place where we can talk about tough things. We ought to be able to talk in an intellectually honest way. We ought to be a place where people can gather and serve their intellectual curiosity on all matters. Rick's done 5 incredible summits, I consider them. Everything from energy policy and healthcare policy to what we're discussing tonight, which is critically important. So we welcome you to this campus. You are always welcome here. Every one of you, I will give you a golf cart ride in my own golf cart anytime you want to come around. You think I'm kidding. It's tcost@ju.edu. I give golf cart tours all the time, and most of those students end up coming to this school. So we are thrilled to have you here tonight. This is going to be an exciting discussion. I'm going to turn it back to Rick. Good evening.
Thank you, President Cost. We're very excited to have you tonight. And before we hear from our speakers, a brief word, actually, about the Institute and this forum tonight. This institute, the JU Public Policy Institute, was established in 2012, just over 2 years ago. It is the first institute of its kind in the state of Florida. And at the heart of that is the academic program, which is all graduate degree courses in public policy, a master's degree in public policy, which is an MPP degree, and 3 dual degree programs. You can get your MPP and your law degree through Florida Coastal. It takes 4 years instead of 5. You can get your MPP and your MBA through the business school here. You can also get your MPP and your graduate degree in marine science through the marine science program. The first MPP degree was conferred in the country, was conferred at Harvard in 1971. Since that time, over 50 MPP programs have grown around the country. This is the first and only MPP program in the state of Florida. And in April, The first MPP degree to be conferred in the history of the state of Florida will be conferred here at Jacksonville University's campus at our graduation ceremonies in April. We're very excited about that. A fundamental part of the mission of the Institute is to prepare a new generation of leaders, the next generation of leaders in the public, private, and non-public sectors through our academic program. But part of why we're here tonight is another part of the mission of the Institute, and that is beyond the academic program, is the Institute to serve as a neutral gathering place for the discussion of public policy ideas and programs, to address significant public policy issues that shape the future of our city, of the state, and of the nation. Tonight's program, as President Cost mentioned, is the 5th public policy program and the last of this semester, of the fall semester here at Jacksonville University. A few weeks ago, our first program, we had both a Republican and a Democrat, Andrew Crenshaw and Corinne Brown, in this very room to discuss national, domestic, and foreign policy. Shortly after that, through a partnership with Notre Dame, we brought an economist, Dr. Greisick, PhD in economics, to talk about energy prices and energy policy. In collaboration with the Children's Commission, we had a symposium that we hosted on children's health policy. And just last week, some of you may have seen that we had Gary Chartrand, the chairman of the State Board of Education, Pam Stewart, the commissioner of education, Nikolai Vitti, the superintendent, and 5 others out in an education policy conference just last week. Tonight, we shift the focus to something different. We shift it to our criminal justice system. And in particular, in our criminal justice system, we're going to talk about the juvenile justice system. And we are extraordinarily pleased to have not only 4 elected officials, but 4 elected officials that play a very leading, critical, and leadership role in the juvenile justice system. Let me describe tonight's format for you. First of all, you're going to hear from each of the elected officials for a little bit, for about 10 minutes each. And at the end of their presentations, we're going to have a panel discussion, which I will lead. But if you look in your packets, we have a little card for you. If you would like to write out a question, if you have a question for a particular elected official or a question for all of them, if you will fill out that question, that card, Amy Lane, who is, we can't operate without Amy Lane, let me just tell you. Amy Lane runs the place. But Amy will be around, you can give the cards to her, and when we start the panel discussion, in addition to the questions I'll be glad to ask some of the questions you may have. And so first we'll hear from our elected officials, then we'll have a discussion on some of these issues. Our first speaker tonight is the state attorney for the 4th Judicial Circuit of Florida. And by the way, we get so used to saying that sometimes we don't realize that includes Clay, Nassau, and Duval County, of course. And she's been a prosecutor for 32 years. As state attorney, during her initial 25 years, she literally, and by the way, I was there for a lot of these, she tried hundreds of cases, including over 50 homicide cases. They didn't include this, many of those first-degree murders, many of those capital cases, actually. In 2007, she joined the 7th Judicial Circuit as an assistant state attorney and was elected to serve as state attorney for the 4th Judicial Circuit in 2008. She's devoted substantial time to training police and prosecutors, and she achieved board certification in criminal and trial law, has involved many civic activities. But let me tell you a couple other pieces. State Attorney Angela Corey grew up here in Jacksonville. She's a Seminole from undergraduate school. However, so was the sheriff. She was a Gator for law school, and we were law school classmates. Just thought I'd mention that, Sheriff. Because my wife and I have a mixed marriage. My wife also went to Florida State, although I went to University of Florida. After that, Angela was hired by the person that I consider to be, and I'm sure she might agree with this, probably the greatest public servant in the history of our city, and that is Ed Austin, who served as public defender, general counsel, state attorney, mayor, and chairman of the port. And for 10 years, I worked with Angela at the state attorney's office. She has gone on since that time for an extraordinary career as a prosecutor. As state attorney, she is responsible now for the 3 counties I mentioned, over 120 prosecutors, and is responsible for all the prosecutions in these 3 counties of the 4th Judicial Circuit. It's my pleasure to introduce to you the state attorney, Angela Corey.
Thank you. Rick was one of my bosses, as was George Batey, and they trained me well. I have to tell you, we loved our years under Ed Austin, and it was actually 33 years ago this month that I started prosecuting in the juvenile division of the state attorney's office. And I believe because the frontline prosecutors are those who are most important to these issues, I want to introduce you to 2 people I'm very proud of. Brooke Brady, who's our division chief. Brooke, stand up. She's our division chief of juvenile. And I've told this joke before that I started my term as state attorney off by stealing. And when people look at me and they say, "You stole?" I said, "I did. I stole Alan Louder from communities and schools." I knew the day that I met Alan Louder that he was the right person to lead our diversion programs, and they are in excellent hands, as is our juvenile prosecution. So I thank all of my staff for their hard work. You don't see what they do day in and day out. But a lot of what they've done, combined with what our sheriff has done, and I'm going to let the sheriff talk about some of the statistics, is actually good news for all of you. We've reduced the number of juvenile cases in total. And the sheriff has those statistics, and he's going to share them with you. But it's good news when you can stand here and say we have less juvenile cases now than we did 6 years ago. But of the cases that we have now, I want you to know how we handle these cases. They don't just come in and automatically get filed. They don't come in and automatically get direct filed into adult court. Every case is scrupulously screened from the time the police respond to the scene, and then they help us with what we call non-arrest diversion. Non-arrest diversion is a concept that our boss, Ed Austin, created 4 decades ago. It inures to the benefit of both juveniles and adults. We don't talk about adults as much as we do juveniles, but the purpose of non-arrest diversion is to allow Sheriff Rutherford and all of law enforcement to solve a criminal problem without having to send them in front of Judge Davis and his colleagues. If we can solve that problem by summoning them in, a summons is where the state attorney just sends a letter and says, "Come in and we'll deal with this problem," or through what you might have heard about, a civil citation, or even if they do have to be arrested because of certain circumstances, we can still divert the case. Then Alan and his amazing crew, with a lot of help from a lot of people, fashion a sentence, so to speak. And in the same way teen court works, we also run our own diversion programs. We have 7 juvenile diversion programs and many more adult diversion programs. Now that's what we're doing at that end to address juvenile crime. But then the cold hard truth is that some juveniles can't be diverted and some can't stay in the juvenile system. We don't make them into adults by putting them into the adult system. What we do when we follow the law of the state of Florida and decide to direct file juveniles who commit very violent crimes is give ourselves more option in adult court, where a same judge like Judge Henry Davis, a circuit judge, a judge of circuit jurisdiction, which the juvenile court has, can look at that case and help us decide, is it worth adult sanctions? Is it worth combined adult and juvenile sanctions? Or is it eligible for completely juvenile sanctions? How many of you knew before I said that even when you put a juvenile into adult court, you can still impose juvenile sanctions? So it gives us a wider range of sentencing options when we have to put them into adult court. Now, one thing I have to address, because I think it got widely circulated and it was incorrect, but it wouldn't necessarily be a bad thing even if it was true. The Fourth Circuit does not lead the state in juvenile direct files. I've had to correct that misinformation for the last 3 years. Actually, though we're probably the 4th largest circuit, we're 8th in the number of juveniles that we send up to adult court. Does it mean we're any better or any worse than any other circuit? No, it's just the facts. So I think you need to be very careful when you hear statistics that may not be correct. What you need to know is this. As Ed Austin taught each of us, and as I still teach our lawyers today, every case has to be decided on the facts and the law. It has to be decided without regard to race, creed, color, or gender. And the most compelling point about that is we have a lot more men locked up than we do women. It doesn't mean we don't like men. It doesn't mean we don't like young boys. It means that's who's committing the crimes. So when you hear these statistics, when you hear these blanket accusations, some of them are just blanket accusations, ask yourselves, is that the fact? Or is that an antidote being used by special interest groups to try to push their own agenda or their own policy? And I can tell you this, law enforcement in your state attorney's office are sworn to uphold the laws of this great state, and we will continue to do that. And we'll continue to do it with help from a lot of great people. Some of those people are in this room and some couldn't be here tonight. But there are people like Pastor Guns, who's out with a program called Save Our Sons, trying to help us address juvenile issues before they ever even come in front of the sheriff or me. We've got people like Donald Foy, who's been leading the charge for years to stop the violence in our community. We're working with the mayor's office, Torrance Sinclair, on some special programs. And Almond Gunter, who's here sitting next to Alan, has been working with us diligently. I invite each and every one of you to come watch Alan and Carla, who runs our girls program. Watch them in action dealing with these juveniles, and you'll be proud of your state attorney's office. Thank you so much. Thank you, Rick.
Thank you so much, Angela. And as a reminder, like I said, if you have any questions, if you'd like to fill out a card at the end of the presentations, we'll be glad to answer some of those questions. Our second presentation is going to come from the sheriff. He has served for three terms here as sheriff for Duval County. He's now in his 40th year with the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office, where he's attained the ranks of sergeant, lieutenant, captain, and then was appointed by the Sheriff James McMillan to the rank of sheriff. Sheriff Rutherford is a graduate of Florida State University, as you saw earlier, the FBI National Academy, and the FBI's Executive Institute. I'm glad I got that out of the way, because let me tell you about the sheriff. When I was a kid growing up on the West Side, just about 9 and 10 years old, playing baseball at Mellott and Steve Friel Field, we grew up in Cedar Hills, so did the sheriff. Guy 3 years older was a left-handed pitcher that nobody could hit, and that guy's name was John Rutherford. I can still remember what a great baseball player he was. And in those days, it's changed so much. I used to disappear. I don't know how many are in this category. Get on my bike. I lived over off of 103rd Street in Nord, if you know where that is, on Moret Drive. My brothers and I get on our bike. We'd head over to that ballpark. We'd be there at the morning. We'd be there 12 hours, and we'd come home at night. There was no texting. There was no cell phone. This is in the 1960s. But I can tell you that John Rutherford was one heck of a pitcher. And he even mentioned to me that one time he threw a no-hitter at Mellott, but unfortunately it was a home run. And so I just thought it was a little bit different from our president, who threw a no-hitter here at JU. We both went on to graduate from the same high school. He was ahead of me by 3 years. He graduated from Westside High School, which is formerly known as Forest High School. And then in 1974 began his career with the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office, this year marking 40 years. Now I have to tell you something. That is one heck of a career. That is one heck of a career. And I will also tell you, as some of you may know, I had the great privilege of serving as general counsel for the city. And when I did, I worked very closely with the sheriff. I was his lawyer, and we worked with his department. It's not only one heck of a career, he was one heck of a sheriff. And I mean that sincerely. That's true. I'm saying this because he's term limited, I'm going to miss him. But also, by the way, to get the magnitude of his job, I think it's when you combine the officers that are on the street and the civilian, is it over 3,000, Sheriff? You take a look at this budget, I think it's grown to, well, a lot of this, of course, a lot of reasons, discussions on cost, 400 million or so? Plus. You're talking an enormous responsibility. And the sheriff, very talented, very smart. I think he's been an outstanding sheriff. We're very pleased to have him tonight, the sheriff for Duval County, John Rutherford.
Thank you very much, Thank you very much. And it is great to reminisce about those old days in Cedar Hills. You know, I tell folks all the time, I had the best childhood growing up. Literally, we would go to the ballpark and we'd be there from sunup to sundown. And you know, I tell folks, and I think this goes to the heart of some of what we have to talk about tonight. I literally had, and many of you who grew up about that same time probably had the same experience. There were probably 8 sets of parents on my street that I had to respond to. And if I didn't, I was in trouble. And little anecdotal story. I'm running for office back in 2002. I pull up in the parking lot of the campaign headquarters, and I'm getting ready to walk in, and Neil Vining, little girl who's helping us in the office, she comes walking out, and she says, "Oh, John, one of your old neighborhood fellas is in there buying a shirt right now." I said, "Really?" I said, "What's his name?" She says, I don't remember his name, but he said he used to spank you." And about that time, Mr. Buzz Ambersley walked out. I said, "That's Buzz Ambersley," and he did. Yeah, that's the way neighborhoods used to be. And folks, I'm going to tell you, I think that's part of the answer to this problem. Because the challenge is simply this. When we want to start talking about crime in Jacksonville, the question is simple. How do we raise young boys and girls like Rick and I growing up at the ballpark? How do you raise them to be nonviolent young men and women? How do you do that? Now, I can tell you law enforcement is not the answer for all that. Folks, in fact, what I talk about when I talk about the challenge facing Jacksonville, I talk about the entire PIE, P-I-E. And what that stands for is prevention, intervention, and enforcement. All of these are equally important. And let me tell you, as I sit here and look out at this crowd, and I see folks that I know have dedicated their entire lives to this issue, David, Jim, a lot of folks in this room, I want you to know this. I want to give you some crime trends real quickly. Because, folks, I'm going to tell you, sometimes we need to take a break and look at what is working in our community. Because fact of the matter is, let me give you some crime numbers real quick. This is our total crime numbers from 2009 to 2013. Total crime in Jacksonville went from 7,881, and now this is UCR. And when I say UCR, that's Uniform Crime Report. So this is all the crime that people really care about. This is murder, rape, robbery, aggravated battery, aggravated assault, auto theft, burglary, residential, burglary, business, those types of crimes. I'm not talking about, jaywalking and that sort of stuff. 7,881 crimes in 2009. 2013, last year, 6,597. Down significantly. Now look, we got a lot of work to do, and I don't want to minimize the work that we have ahead of us. But folks, when I see so many good shepherds in one room that I know are trying to make a difference, what I want you to know is this. What you're doing is working. Because if you don't know that, and you tend to just listen to the anecdotal stories, then you think all this hard work that I've done is not affecting our community, but it is. Let me give you the arrest numbers very quickly. Our arrest numbers for adults from 2009 to 2013. In 2009, we had 46,225 adult arrests. In 2013, that number was down to 30,628. 30,628 from 46,225. Listen to our juvenile numbers, which are down about 57%. From 57,770 in 2009 down to 2,912. So folks, I first want you to know that what you are doing is having an impact. And God bless you for all the hard work that you are pouring into the youth of this community, because you're having an impact. Now, let's talk about these alternatives to arrest. Something interesting that Angela mentioned. Let me give you an idea. In 2013, we had 8,469 calls to the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office where a juvenile was mentioned in the call. So we know, responding to that call, we know that it's a juvenile call. 8,469. Of those, 13.7% the officers checked back with an X-ray, code X-ray. What that means is they went to that scene where there was a juvenile involved in some kind of altercation, and with a verbal warning, they were able to handle that situation. Just with a verbal warning, they handled that situation. Now, the civil citation is the next step after that verbal warning. And I want to give you some numbers on our juvenile citations. But first, let me tell you what a juvenile citation is, because many of you may not know exactly how this works. But a juvenile citation is for a first-time property offense for which a juvenile hasn't been arrested in the past already, and they're a resident, and there's a lot of other rules and regulations that go along with that. But basically, it's a way for us to document a warning to a juvenile. And then we keep track of that warning. And then the next time when that individual is confronted by a police officer, that police officer can check through juvenile justice to see if he's already had a civil citation and whether an arrest, in this case, may be warranted based on what's happened in the past. So those are all opportunities that we have beyond putting juveniles in jail. We don't put every juvenile in jail that we could. And so I want to make that clear. Now, I've heard this number thrown around also about, you know, when we arrest juveniles, it's what do they call it? A pipeline from schools to prisons, I think. Well, first of all, I can tell you that an arrest, for example, just to give you a couple of stats on that, when we make an arrest, within 1 year, 11% of those kids are recidivists. That means 11% create another crime that they get arrested for within the first year. Within the first 4 years, that number jumps to about a little over 16%. So 16% recidivism in the first 4 years. Now, I don't know if that's a good number or a bad number, but what I do know is that it's having an impact because, let's see, if 11% failed in the first year and 16%, so we're 84% positive. That's a pretty good number. And we need to realize that. Now, could it be better? I would hope so. I'd like to see a lot better recidivism number after 4 years. But there's this argument that, well, if you write a civil citation, that you increase or decrease the likelihood of this school to prison pipeline. Well, the fact of the matter is, and there is a difference, and I am in favor of the civil citation process, but I don't know that it has as an extreme an impact as people insinuate. Because the fact of the matter is, when you look at, since we started the civil citation process in 2012, we have issued 489 civil citations. 13% have been rearrested. So now that's in a 2-year period, not 4, but you're comparing 13% to 16%. So now you extend that out a couple more years, and those percentages will go up. So the gap, the difference, the positive effect of a civil citation will increase. I would propose somewhere to around, if you just double that, it's going to be somewhere around 5 plus or minus percent, a percent or two. So civil citations are a good thing. But I believe we also have to have, and that's where the prevention and the intervention piece comes in. But folks, we also have to have in our system a process in the enforcement end that makes kids understand that there are consequences to their actions. Because many of these kids are already incorrectly learning at home because they're not tying consequences to their actions at home, and that's how they come into our world. So the civil citations, I think, are a great opportunity for us to look at going forward, how we can better utilize them. There is, again, that plus or minus 5% bump. Look, and you know, some people might say, well, holy cow, you know, all that for 5%, that's not a lot. But you know what? If your kid's in one of that 5%, it's a lot. It's an awful lot. So the challenge facing Jacksonville, again, is how do we raise young boys and girls to become nonviolent young men and women? And folks, a lot of that is the neighborhoods that I talked about when I first started. It's families. Folks, it's building stronger families. Anybody know what the divorce rate is in Duval County? A lot of people don't want to talk about this because 73% of us are divorced. Think about that. Nobody wants to talk about this. Nobody wants to talk about these kids that are being raised in single-parent families. Not that it can't be done. It can be done successfully, but that's not the best model. We need to talk about those kind of things. We need to be talking about virtue. We need to be talking about faith with these kids. Because let me tell you, when you sit down across from some of these kids, they have no value for life. T1, I was at Bethel Baptist Church, and T1, he's a great kid now. He was a hellion back a few years ago. Great kid now, a modern day poet, and I mean, he's got an amazing life now. T1 said, when I was back involved in that stuff, I felt like nothing, so I acted like nothing. And let me tell you, that's powerful. Think about a 17, 18-year-old kid who has a weapon in his pocket, and he feels like nothing, and he's going to act like nothing. If he doesn't value his life, he is certainly not going to value yours. So if we're going to raise children to be nonviolent young adults, we've got to get values back into their lives. This is not about economics. I hear that all the time. It's not economics, it's values. There are a lot of poor people in this community that would never stick a gun in your face or rob you or anything else. It's not economics, it's values, and that's what we need to get back to. And that's the conversation I'm going to tell you up front that I think most communities don't want to have. Because you know what? When you start talking about values and virtue, what do you got to talk about? You got to talk about faith. Then you got to talk about God. And nobody wants to have those conversations. That's the problem. And so I'm standing up to talk about it. And I hope that through our prevention, intervention, and enforcement, we can actually impact these children's lives and save them from themselves. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sheriff. Our next presenter is the Public Defender for the 4th Judicial Circuit of Florida. Interestingly enough, if you're not familiar with the Public Defender's Office, in 1964, the very famous U.S. Supreme Court case, Gideon versus Wainwright, this happens to be the 50th anniversary, in which the U.S. Supreme Court held that indigents, poor people, were deserving of representation. That was the establishment of the Public Defender's Office. And by the way, the first public defender in the history of our city happened to be Ed Austin back in 1964 before he became a prosecutor. Our current public defender is our next speaker, and that is Matt Shirk. Mr. Shirk went to Western Illinois University and graduated with a BS in 1997. He received his law degree from Florida Coastal in 1999. He worked for 5 years as an assistant public defender. Then he was in private practice with Tassoni and Eller. And then he was elected public defender in 2008 for his first term. And then he took over, then he was elected a second time in 2012. Since taking office, Mr. Shirk has formed the Veterans Treatment Courts, implemented cost savings technologies, and launched a recovery resource program. In 2010, he established Vision for Excellence Summer Camp, which provides young people educational resources, interaction with positive role models, and community building opportunities. Very pleased to introduce to you the Public Defender for the 4th Judicial Circuit, who's responsible for over 70 lawyers, by the way. Think that about right? 80 lawyers. A very big responsibility for Clay, Nassau, and Duval counties. The Public Defender for the 4th Judicial Circuit, Matt Shirk.
Thank you. I thought you were going to tell them about how we were when we really got to know each other when we had that flat tire on the way to Orlando. So, yeah. I think I saw Ray in here too, who is the tire fixer. Thank you, Rick, for having me. This is a really great discussion to have, so timely, and I see so many familiar faces who seem to appear at many of these forums that we have to discuss juvenile justice. Let me tell you, I do see a lot of unfamiliar faces as well, and some people who may not know a whole lot about what we do in the Public Defender's Office, and frankly, why we're even here in part of this discussion. In 1963, the Gideon case established the Public Defender's Office, and what the Supreme Court did was confirm that the Sixth Amendment to the Constitution guaranteed your right to counsel even if you can't afford to hire a lawyer. And so the public defender's system was created in Florida, which is unique. Unlike any other state, it's a statewide system where an elected public defender is elected in each of the 20 judicial circuits. There's no other state in the country that has a system where the public defender actually answers to the people and is elected by the people. We operate in all 3 counties, the same counties that Angela operates in the 4th Circuit. So we have an office here in Jacksonville, but we also have smaller offices in the Clay and Nassau counties. We handle a wide variety of cases. We have 80 lawyers, 8 of which is unique, particular to tonight's discussion, handle juvenile cases. But we handle a whole wide variety of cases. Last year, we represented about 38,000 people in hearings and in trials and in cases in the 4th Judicial Circuit. Our budget is about $12 million, about half of what Angela's budget is. But juvenile crime and juvenile justice is something that is important to me, and when I got elected, it was something that we wanted to make our mark in this circuit, in the state, and that's why I appointed Rob Mason, who is here, to be the director of our juvenile unit. And Rob has been very active, and many of you I know Rob well, and is very vocal in juvenile justice issue, and is very passionate about kids and juvenile justice, and is the perfect person to be leading our unit. There are other people I know that work in juvenile. I know Judge Crenshaw, who left the bench and then came to work for us and carries a full caseload representing kids in juvenile matters. I thought I saw Jordan Beard here as well, and I think we have some others. Can't name them all. Juvenile, you heard some good news already, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking because I know many of you have questions, but there is a lot of good news. Juvenile crime is down. Crime in general is down throughout the country. You heard the numbers. It's over 50% less than it was when Angela and I came into office in 2009. So things are working well. As many of you believe, and I do as well, we can always do better. And so we would like to have that number even lower, and I think all of you agree. And so there are programs I think we can do better at. Civil citations is great. It's being utilized. It's wonderful. Our numbers in Jacksonville are lower than they are in the other parts of the state. I think we can do better. 27% of those eligible have received a civil citation in the first 10 months of this year. I think we can do better. And that's why we're here tonight, to discuss ways maybe we can do better in civil citations. The other issue that we haven't talked much about, I hope we talk about tonight, is the issue of direct filing of juveniles as adult. The good news is that since 2008, it's 50% lower than it was in 2008. So we are direct filing. The State Attorney's Office is direct filing fewer cases than they were 6 years ago. But there are issues with putting a juvenile and making them an adult, which is when you have one person who makes the decision without any other influence. I think that it's something we need to talk about. And in Florida, I'm not just talking about the 4th Judicial Circuit, but in Florida, when there's no judicial oversight over the direct filing of juveniles, unlike any other place in the country, I think that's a discussion we need to have. There is no mechanism where a court, Judge Davis or any other juvenile court in this circuit, that can stop a child from being made an adult. And this is not an indictment of the State Attorney's Office, of Angela Corey. It's of our system. I think it's a system that is flawed. I think many of you in this room would agree that it's a proper discussion to have. The question is, why are we, as the Public Defender's Office, here and talking about these issues? Well, in terms of civil citations, all those cases that don't get a civil citation end up having our office represent them. And we're in the business of wanting to have fewer cases. And frankly, we're in the business of wanting to have fewer cases, and it's good for the community, it's good for the children. It's also good for your pocketbook because it's less tax dollars that we have to spend representing folks. And one of the issues with civil citations that we have is, and I know many of you in this room, is the fact that people, children accused of battery, resisting without violence, are not permitted to get a civil citation. And fundamentally, we believe that that should be something that the sheriff ought to be able to consider with his officers when approaching somebody charged with battery or accused of battery. Currently, we represent about 177 kids who would have been eligible for a civil citation had battery been an option, but yet they were diverted anyway, and they also ended up having to have the public defender's office. So the idea needs to be discussed tonight, and is worthy of discussion. I know many of you have questions related to that. I know that I'm talking a little too long. I think we need to get to your questions, and so I'll allow Mr. Mullaney to come up and introduce the next speaker. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. By the way, I gladly stand corrected. Gideon 1963, Ed Austin appointed 1964. We'll get that one corrected. I thought everything began with him, but it really didn't. There were some things before him. The next speaker is somebody that I remember very, very well, have a very special memory of, and I'll tell you why in just a second. But he's a circuit court judge. It's the Honorable Henry Davis. He's a native of Jacksonville, and this is the information he provided, and I'm going to just add a little bit to it. After practicing law with the U.S. Justice Department and in private practice for several years, he began his judicial career with his appointment to circuit judge by Governor Lawton Chiles in 1992. Judge Davis has presided in assignments to the civil, family, criminal felony, and juvenile dependency divisions of the 4th Judicial Circuit. He's a member of the Florida Bar, of the Florida Board of Bar Examiners and the Florida Commission on Ethics, and he received his law degree, as you would expect from this group, from Florida State University, because they all have. What he left out of that is that between undergraduate school and his law degree, he joined the Navy and served in Vietnam. After coming back and then going to law school, he opened up a private practice. He had just opened up his private practice. We ended up in 1982 in a misdemeanor courtroom in a hotly contested breach of peace case with a maximum 60-day jail sentence because his client wouldn't plead, who I think he might tell you the client was kind of crazy, forcing a brand new prosecutor with Ed Austin, who was new to the office about 30 days, and having his very first jury trial, because this went to jury trial and all the way to verdict. That prosecutor, you have probably figured out, was me. And I still remember my very first jury trial with Judge Henry Davis on the other side. He was in private practice back then. For tonight's discussion, what is even more important is not only his distinguished career, but the fact that he has spent 8 years on the juvenile bench. And he's the administrative judge responsible for the juvenile division for the 4th Judicial Circuit. And we are very pleased to have with us tonight Judge Henry Davis.
Okay, folks, this is your homework. I hope you're prepared. Is the mic working? Can you? Okay, thank you. Well, President Cos, Mr. Mullaney, I certainly appreciate you all having me here this evening. It's always an honor to be here. I mentioned to Mr. Mullaney quite often I get invited to speak one time. I don't get invited back. So I'm used to it, so you won't hurt my feelings. And I just acknowledge Chief Stevenson is here, and we're talking about juvenile justice. This is the superintendent of our detention center here. So we have Chief Stevenson running the Department of Juvenile Justice and the superintendent of our detention center. It's an honor to be here this evening, and thank you all for being here. Now, as always, I can find the gloom in the picture here. So we do have good information, good reports here. I'm going to get this situated. We do have good statistics, but I just want to, I know we have 10 minutes, and I'll be through in 10 minutes. Okay, no, I'll be through in 10 minutes. But I just want to give you, just as a background or backdrop for my comments, some of you may know, but I was born right here in Jacksonville in 1948. I was born near the intersection of Hogan Road and Tiger Hole Road. I don't know if you know where that is. It's out there in Hogan. And I spent my first 5 years there. And then we moved to the corner of the intersection of St. Augustine and Emerson Street, right here in Jacksonville. And I lived there until I was 20 years old, went through high school and part of the college there. So I'm well familiar with the communities of Jacksonville. The schools were all segregated at that time. So I graduated from a segregated high school in 1966. So I have a background from this. So because of the 10-minute time limit, I just want to make sure I'm going to jump ahead to the conclusion here, what I have right here. In conclusion, it will echo of some things that were said earlier, and it was what the sheriff mentioned. You know, we have to focus our efforts on children who are not yet conceived. That's where our efforts need to be focused, on children who have not yet been conceived. Because once a child is conceived under these circumstances, your lot is cast in some situations now. I know that's contrary to what most of you have been trained to believe. But these are things that we're just going to have to put up front and acknowledge that these are serious barriers when you're not having children born into families. Human beings are designed to live in families. Whether we like it or not, a mother and a father and a family. That's how humans are designed to live. So that's just the rules. I'm not here to cause trouble, but those are the rules. And that's how we have to look at these things. Now, another matter we have here is we must get over our aversion to discussing race. People don't want to discuss race. I bring up race with my colleagues, they turn red and leave. Well, I mean, that's just the truth. They don't want to hear the problem. We're here talking about juvenile justice. We're talking about black kids. That's what we're talking about. There are some days I go into court, every child on the docket is a black child. I just by an afterthought, I was looking at my docket today. There were 18 juveniles on my docket today, 15 were black. That's 80%. And that's a typical day in juvenile delinquency court, adult court. It doesn't matter whether it's Duval County, Nassau, Clay, or any place else in the country. That's what we're talking about here this evening. And the reason I mentioned my background, I grew up in this culture. I grew up in the neighborhood over there. We didn't have, Instagram and all of that, but you were always hearing about somebody getting his throat cut, somebody got shot with a shotgun, and it was this type of thing that's the reality of where you live. And that was just what we grew up with. I considered it normal. I didn't know anything different. Somebody got shot last night and these kind of things. And some of these things, we just have to be realistic if we're going to make any efforts in the area of addressing juvenile delinquency here. Now, we know that we have a history in America, something we don't want to talk about. We have a history of slavery. Slavery was instituted 400 years ago, and you'll say, well, forget about that. That was 400 years ago. We had the Emancipation Proclamation. We have a ceremony. We have Juneteenth ceremonies every year and whatnot. But the lingering effects of slavery are here today. The people I'm concerned with, the people I talk with, don't even know JU is in Duval County. We have a population out there that does not read the paper. They don't know. If you had asked them to come to JU without a map or without GPS, they couldn't find it. But that's the world that we live in. People would not come to a forum such as this. People have tried to do a whole lot of things. They're wonderful programs. But we have to address the fact that we have a distinct culture, people who are still the products of slavery. The culture is. I can tell you some of the things my grandfather and grandparents would tell me about the life of a slave. And I have a book here. I'm not going to read these books to you. But I read these books. This book is entitled Slave Testimony. This is what this is, Slave Testimony. It's a book with recordings of slaves going back as far as people interviewed them and just talk to them about what life was like in slavery. We talk about the 300 or so girls that were stolen in Nigeria and sold off sent off into marriage. But that was a common occurrence here in Duval County during slavery. Nobody would have put in the paper somebody sold 300 girls. it wouldn't have been newsworthy. That was just what it was. It wouldn't even been written up anyplace. But these are the kinds of things that have impacted the people who are living today. Now, we can look at the progress, and it is good progress, but there's still so much more that we have to do and acknowledge things. We get upset and get embarrassed when we just tell the truth about what's going on here. I attended school with kids who had absolutely no chance of becoming a lawyer, a judge, a sheriff, a prosecutor. That wasn't an option for them. It was never on the table. That was never an option for many kids that we have coming up through the system here. And we have to keep one thing in mind, that the juveniles in our juvenile delinquency system, these people we call delinquents, they too are victims. They are victims. The most vicious, vile juvenile in Duval County is a victim. They didn't ask for their circumstances. Most of them didn't ask for their circumstances. Now, some of them had options, but most of them didn't ask for those circumstances. Had I had the parents that some of these kids had, I would have been dead too by now. I mean, that's serious, because if I had to fend for myself when I was 7, 8, or 10 years old, what would I have done? I wouldn't be walking behind a lawnmower somewhere. That wouldn't be enough money. I would have to do something more serious to get more money to do it. Some of these kids don't have the options that we have here. Now, everybody here, you can congratulate yourselves because you won the lottery. Did you know you won the lottery? Look under your seat. No, don't look under your seat. But you won the lottery. Everybody here won the lottery. It's called, you hear it in the media, the birth lottery. We all won the birth lottery. Sheriff, you won the birth lottery. Ms. Corey, you won the birth lottery. Mr. Shirk. We won the birth lottery because we were born to healthy, intelligent mothers, healthy, intelligent fathers. We didn't go out and pick them. We won the lottery. We won 2 healthy, intelligent parents. I can tell you in court, if you win 1, that's not good enough. Quite often, you have a good mother and the father's no worse. But we won a lottery. So when we start patting ourselves on the back about going to law school and we won this and we won that, we had something to deal with. Now, we could have gone to prison anyway, but we had an option. We had a real option. Many of these kids do not have an option. They just aren't smart enough to cope with this society. They simply aren't smart enough to cope with this. This is a very complex society. I mean, why does anybody have to figure out what a mortgage is? Why do we need to worry about that? Interest rates, where did that come from? Whose idea is it that we have to work 40 hours a week, sit through this interview, stare at a computer screen all day, put it with people you don't even like, just to keep your job? I mean, whoever made these rules? You got to pay a mortgage every month. Why? Why can't I take off a few months? I don't want to pay it this month. But who makes these rules? You miss one, you're going to be outside, you're not going to worry about that mortgage. But that's the whole point. This is a very complex situation. Who says you have to spend 12 years in school? Why? I mean, why do we have to know about a subject and a verb? Who cares? But if you don't know these things, you're not going to get a job. You're not going to function. But if you don't have some parents with some money who can put you through school, public education is very expensive, by the way. But if you don't have parents who can put you through school, you are in trouble, big trouble. If you don't have somebody who can pay the rent and the mortgage and buy you books and keep the lights on while you're trying to study, you are in big trouble. If you have to move 2, 3, 5, 6 times a school year, you are in big trouble. If you have to put up with the bullies who want to fight all the time, and you are in big trouble. You have to decide, is it worth getting another fist fight to go to school today? You are in big trouble. If you don't have parents who can negotiate, and Sheriff, you talk about the spankings, that was a common occurrence at my high school. Henry Davis got a few, but I didn't deserve I didn't deserve any of them. No, I deserved every one, and I got away with a lot of things we didn't. Just as an aside, I got a whipping. Mr. Mulaney, you mentioned the first day early in the state attorney. I got a whipping the first day of school in the first grade. For running across the grass, our principal had a rule. They did the landscaping. You can't run across the grass. I grew up out in Hogan. That's what you did with grass. You run across it. So I'll never forget that. I mean, that was so unjust to get a whipping for running across the grass. I don't know if I wanted to come back to that school, but anyway. But that's what we have to understand. And we won the lottery, as I say, by having healthy, intelligent parents. That can't be overemphasized. That can't be overemphasized. Now, in the children we see in our courts on a regular basis, as I said, they simply didn't win. So what we have to do as a society, if we're concerned about this, is do what we can to compensate for that fact. We can't just say, well, you didn't win the lottery, too bad, just going to prison. But we have to compensate for that, and that's one of the things I was mentioning to Mr. Mulaney and some others, more emphasis on early childhood development, and to do some things that people here will, recoil at the thought of it. But there are just some people who shouldn't have children. I'm just absolutely serious about it. I mean, that's the problem. I sit in dependency court sometimes. I sit there for 2 years, and it's not uncommon to have a grandmother who's in court, pregnant, and going through this thing called a case plan. You're going to teach a grandmother how to raise a child? Please. I mean, she hasn't gotten anybody in. What are we doing? Why are we here? These are things, when you get up to 15 or 16 children, that to me, that's totally outrageous. I don't care if you're a multi-millionaire, you don't have but 24 hours in a day. But we just have, it goes on and on and on to menopause. I mean, I'm serious. Or maybe after, I don't know how that works. But we don't want to talk about it. But that's the problem. If your roof is leaking, you're going to have to get up there and figure out how to stop it. The problem is that there are too many more of these children coming into the system every day. We have cases where a woman has 6, 8, 10 children, and everyone, without an exception, is taken by the state. Yep. Everyone's born fetal alcohol syndrome, cocaine in the system, the mother smoking, doesn't see a doctor, drops the baby off at Shands, or what it's called now, and just walks out, leaves the baby there. And the baby's told, well, do the best you can. But unless we really look at the way we're doing on that end of the problem, what we are doing is good, is helpful, but we're going to have to understand the problems that we are facing. Now, I know it's over 10 minutes, I'm going to sit down here, but maybe they'll invite me back. But there's something else. But I'm going to do something now. The United States Supreme Court is finally recognizing some of the things that I said are true. They're not going to write this in an opinion. But I just brought this book here. There's a case, this says Graham versus Florida. I think I counted about 47 pages in this opinion. Now, they went on 47 pages, talking and talking and talking. But what this boiled down to is that some juveniles, if they have brains their brains are less mature as juveniles, of course, and juveniles are less susceptible to deterrence. That means saying essentially some juveniles simply don't understand and appreciate the consequences of their behavior. So therefore, juveniles who don't commit homicides, they must be released at some point. But Graham versus Florida could apply to 90% of the people we have in juvenile court and our adult courts. People just don't think well enough to attach consequences to their behavior. And I don't care if they're 15 or 50. That's the crux of the problem. We have a very large population of people who just don't think. I spent a lot of years in barbershops with black men, and you'll be amazed at what some of these guys argue about. I mean, really get heated arguments over whatever. And they're still arguing about the Jaguars. I thought everybody gave up on that. But well, I'm serious. I'm serious. I mean, you won't believe the subjects that go on, and whatever it is. But you can end up doing something, shooting or killing somebody over something that's totally unimportant. That's what drives this system. We have to really be conscious of this as we go through. And one other thing I'm going to mention, I'll be through. There are two cases, Hall versus Florida and Atkins versus Virginia. And these cases forbid the execution of persons with intellectual disabilities. It used to be called mental retardation. And one of the observations in these cases is persons with intellectual disability are likely unable to make the calculated judgments that are the premise for the deterrence rationale in sentencing, and the medical community defines intellectual disability according to 3 criteria: significantly sub-average intellectual functioning, 1, 2, deficit in adaptive functioning, that is the inability to learn basic skills and adjust behavior to changing circumstances, and the onset of these deficits during the developmental period. And the court is wrestling with what this ultimately means, about 70%, and they have a lot of stats that I don't understand. But we have a population of people that's just functioning with intellectual disability. They simply aren't smart enough to cope with what we're telling them to do. I hear people all the time, we're going to put services in the home. First of all, where's the home? Who is in the home? And you're going to keep putting more services on the population. They just, what are you going to do if you don't understand what they're talking about? And you want this person to leave so you can get some supper going, and they're around and telling you about some questions. So we're going to have to understand that there is a distinct population of people that just can't be integrated into the mainstream American society. It's not going to happen. In another book I have here, Ms. Corey, how much time I got? You're not going to prosecute me? Okay, well, here's another book. I was going to just point some things out. Here's the book, Freedom's Prophet, by Bishop Richard Allen, the AME Church. He founded the AME Church. Now, the reason I brought this book, I read this kind of stuff, folks, but the reason I brought this book, Bishop Allen was born February 14, 1760, and he died March 26, 1831. He lived through the American Revolution. He lived back during the time of George Washington. Okay, I got it. Okay, with George Washington and some of the others. But the whole point of this matter, the matter is, he and some others discussed the same issues. What we're talking about here tonight, they were discussing this back in 1780, 1790, and 2000 about the freed slaves. Pennsylvania was one of the first states to abolish slavery, so a lot of slaves escaped and came to Pennsylvania. And the same things we're discussing tonight, they were discussing then. So if we just keep discussing these things, nothing's going to change. If we don't get out and get people to reduce the sizes of their families and do some more important things. Thank you.
Thank you, Judge, very, very much. We really appreciate your comments. I hope you'll join me in thanking all 4 of our elected officials for their presentations. We have several questions. We will open up for the panel discussion part, but I'll kick it off with one question, which goes to the heart of certainly an issue that's being discussed, not just in Florida, but also nationally. And I'm not saying there's a right or wrong answer to this, but for each of our panelists, a question to consider is this. What factors do you consider? What are the relevant factors? When is it justified, if ever? I say that for the public defender, maybe it's never justified, but when is it justified to direct file? And what I'm talking about, for those who aren't as familiar with the juvenile justice system, when is it appropriate? Under what factors do you consider? And when a juvenile should be prosecuted in the adult system? And as the state attorney has pointed out, potentially face adult sanctions, maybe juvenile sanctions, maybe a combination of both. But what are the factors that are legitimate to consider in making that very serious decision? And maybe what I'll do is I'll start off with the public defender, if you'd like, because I know that's an issue to be discussed.
Obviously, there are cases where the juvenile system is not going to be equipped to handle a child that has committed a crime that is serious enough, like murder. And I would argue that it should be limited to those cases, the capital cases. And I don't think I have to say a whole lot more than just, I think that that is. But I think the problem with our system is that it allows a lot of other kinds of cases, but there's no judicial oversight. There's no opportunity for that child to go to a judge and say, I'm not the appropriate case, and have a court send the case back to juvenile. It is the decision that's made by the...
Well, I'm going to ask a separate question on the process for the decision making. Whether it's the court or an individual, the factor I'd like to isolate, the one of national debate, is what are the appropriate factors that you think need to be considered? Or is it ever, first I guess, is it ever appropriate to file on a juvenile as an adult? If so, what are the factors that you consider in arriving at that decision?
I think it is appropriate. There are cases where it is appropriate, and it should be limited to capital cases.
Okay. Judge.
Mr. Mullaney, I'm going to respectfully decline. Thank you.
Fair enough. Judicial temperament. We'll come back. Sheriff?
Well, wow. Sorry, if you get close to that, it's loud. I would agree with capital cases, but I think there are also, I think you have to look at the individual circumstances, and that's why I'm not sure, Rick, that I think you can break out from the process what the guidelines would be. Because if you have a process in place that truly vets those circumstances, like through the courts, then I think that's how that determination should be made. And I believe that is the process.
And I agree that it has to be factored on not only the facts of the case, the level of violence, and whether or not the juvenile justice system can address the needs and concerns of the individual offenders. People need to remember that the maximum sentence in juvenile court, that even the judge has no more control over, is 18 to 36 months, is as long as a maximum risk facility can keep a juvenile. Sometimes that simply isn't long enough. So that's one of our biggest factors, is whether or not even the maximum program in juvenile would be sufficient punishment, deterrence, and or protect the safety of the community.
Thank you all. I will tell you, we have lots of questions. Thank you for participation. Not be able to get all of them, but I've kind of grouped them a little bit. A couple people have asked the very same question, and this is really directed as much to the sheriff and to the state attorney, and it's one that the public defender raised, is what about the idea of allowing civil citations to be issued for batteries? What is your thought on that?
Yeah, listen, I'm opposed to that for this reason. But first, I think what we need to do is define clearly for everyone the difference between a battery and an affray. Two completely different things. You know, when Rick used to call me out to go over to the Biff Burger after high school, that was a public affray. You know, we would, you know, guys would walk over there and duke it out at the Biff Burger next to Forest High School. That's where you went to settle all your, you know, grievances. Well, that's a public affray. I have no problem with a civil citation in a public affray type situation, none whatsoever. But when you have a child in a school who is, and look, I tend to look at them this way. You have sheep and you have wolves. And when a wolf attacks a sheep in a school and he just walks up and cold cocks some kid that's not even looking at him, that is not public affray. That is battery, and that violent assault needs to be addressed as a violent assault. And no quarter given, because this goes back to what the judge was talking about. They see no consequence in their action otherwise. And so I'm adamantly opposed to battery. I completely support the concept of public affray because we have a lot of that in our school. And we do write them for public affray. But I'm opposed to battery.
And Rick, if I could, I want to address part of the sentiment behind civil citation was to keep a juvenile from getting a record. Well, what are you going to do about the internet? How are you going to erase the internet? Because a lot of these kids are out on the internet bragging about the crimes they commit. They're out there holding guns, posing, having it on their social media pages. Also, if they do something in school, anybody can put a video of it or post about the fact that the person did that. So Why are you as concerned about civil citations to prevent them from getting records when we can't erase the internet and they're all out there putting their business in the streets anyway? So refocus, rethink what your actual purpose is. What's the purpose of a civil citation? If it's just to keep somebody from getting a record, that's not going to solve it all by itself. But we do still allow for diversion even when somebody does commit a battery. If an officer can make a determination that non-arrest diversion is appropriate, we've been doing it for 4 decades. We do more than our share, and that's why I do believe, with all due respect, Matt, you and Rob Mason keep putting out these statistics that are incorrect. We non-arrest divert cases that you two never even hear about because we do it working with the police before you ever know about it, before Judge Henry Davis ever sees it. We're going to keep doing that, aren't we, Alan? Yes. We're going to keep doing it.
Well, yeah, let me say this too. The question was directed to the sheriff and the state attorney, but I would like the public defender on the issue that you raised, and a couple members had a question of, and that is the question of the potential for civil citations in battery cases.
I just have to respond to the question about stats. So what stats are we putting out that are
well,
accurate?
How about if we have, yeah.
But second, I'll say when it's related to battery, I understand the difference between a fray and battery, but practically speaking, when maybe this requires a little more training from officers on the street about what an affray and what a battery is, because we see affray and battery, and some appear to be affray, but they're charged with battery. Some are charged with battery, and it clearly is an affray. I won't say any more about it, but simply, one of the issues with civil citations, that the assertion that they're not being held accountable is just not the case with the civil citation, because they have to understand the consequences of their actions, because they go through a program to talk about the consequences of their actions. You can't get a civil citation unless the victim agrees to it. So the victim has been notified. The victim actually has to agree to the civil citation. And so the argument that the victim has a right to come in and discuss it, that fails as well. So, and we're not saying that every single battery should get a civil citation. The concept is that an officer should be able to make the decision on the street whether they want to give a civil citation if they feel that non-arrest diversion is not appropriate. But to be required to arrest or go to non-arrest diversion when civil citation is out there as an option, the officer's hands are tied at that point, because the agreement here locally is that battery is not included in civil citation program. Am I saying that incorrectly?
No, that's correct.
For an automatic civil citation, you're correct, but not for a non-arrest diversion. If the officer feels like it needs to be investigated further, we can still, I don't think I need that microphone, we can still look into the case. But we are not going to sacrifice victims' rights just for the purpose of statistics to say we met a quota that's being met somewhere else in the state of Florida. We're going to look at every case on a case-by-case basis. And if they don't get a civil citation and they are arrested, based on the criteria at DJJ, they're usually released immediately, and then they're still diverted into one of Alan and Carla's programs or into Lawrence Jefferson's teen court. So the fact that his officers arrest them doesn't mean they don't get diverted.
But the point that this side of the argument is trying to make is that you take discretion from the officer. We're not saying that every child that should be charged with battery should be arrested. The whole idea is that the officer should have the discretion to issue a civil citation if the officer in their decision making decides that that's appropriate. That's the argument. It's not that these kids are being arrested and they should have gotten a civil citation. No, the argument is that the officer should have that as one of the tools of all the tools that you're talking about. That's the argument.
Okay. Let me go to the other end of the spectrum. I have from the civil citation and diversion programs to a question for the sheriff and for the state attorney, but also I'd like the public defender to weigh in. And that is, do you think that get tough on crime policies work with juveniles or adults?
Well, look, that's why I focus so much on, when I talk about preventing crime, I talk about the entire pie: prevention, intervention, and enforcement. The idea that somehow prevention and intervention programs, our JREC, our Jacksonville Reentry Center, where we put a lot of resources to help felons. There are 2,200 felons a year coming back to Duval County every year from the State Department of Corrections. I want those folks to be successful, and I work hard at trying to make them successful. I tell folks, that's not soft on crime, that is smart on crime. And that's where I fall down on this. I want good prevention and intervention programs. I understand that enforcement is important as well because, as the judge mentioned, you have to be sure that these folks understand there are consequences to your actions. But the prevention and the intervention part that we focus on so much is not soft on crime. That is being smart on crime. And that's why I support our dismiss program, our Jacksonville Reentry Center, the PACE Center for Girls, all of these different programs that many of you in this room, I know, are out there running, that are having such a tremendous impact in this community. And that's why I want you to know what you're doing is working. And that is smart on crime. It's not about being tough. It's about being smart.
I'm going to tell you the story of Shaheem Lomax, who is typical of many of the cases we direct file. 2005, 13-year-old, civil citation for disruption of a school function as it should have been. 2008, at the age of 16, arrested and pled to aggravated assault, possession of cannabis, possession of a firearm. He was not sent to adult court then. 2009, arrested for battery on a detention facility staff member, somebody there trying to help him while he was in a detention facility, still in juvenile. That case too was kept in juvenile and he was put on conditional release. August of 2010, released from DJJ 1 month later, and he committed murder. Now, this is not uncommon of the kids, the pattern and the escalating pattern of behavior. That's who's going to adult court, and that's who's going to continue to go to adult court, because protection of the community is the primary purpose of law enforcement and prosecution. So we're going to continue to protect the community when facts like that and a record like that warrants no more chances in juvenile court.
Well, I think the data shows that those kinds of programs really don't work. However, I'll tell you that we started a summer camp for kids in 2010 that targets 9 to 15-year-old boys, and part of that program we include a jail tour, which is kind of scary, even for an adult, because I've been through it. We use that as part of the program. The programs that are just scared straight, where that's part of the only part of the program I don't think is useful. It won't work. I think you're right. Anyway.
Judge, this question is one that maybe is appropriate. What can we do as citizens to become part of change in the lives of young people? What can we do in the lives? And I think one of the things, your themes, I certainly got from your presentation, was that we need to get there early, is one of the things I heard you saying. But I think the question is asking, what can we do? What can the people in this room do to help start bringing about the change with young people?
Okay, we could spend the rest of the night on this one, but we won't. But the whole point of it is, what I encourage you to do is not to try to solve all of the world's problems. Identify one child who needs help. One child. If you know of a child, if you're a member of a church or synagogue or another place of worship, one child, one family. If you do one, you do one, you do one, pretty soon you will have a movement. Just one. If you think you're going to solve all the problems, you'll never get started. And if you know somebody who's in school, elementary school, middle school, or any other school, you know these kids need money. You know, they don't need to be patted on the head and say, Jesus loves you. Well, we know that. But you need to go in your pocket and get some money. I'm serious about this. Keep some of these kids in school, because we have kids shoplifting at Walmart. We have one girl shoplifting sanitary napkins. Now, why did we get to that point? You know, but if that's what you want to do, and get to know some of these kids, and you don't be afraid of them. You know, don't be afraid to drive to where they live. You know, and these are the kind of things you can do. We don't necessarily want to live in some place, but you're going to have to go where the problems are. You know, you can't stay out there in the gated community. They don't need you. But you're going to have, but I'm just saying, if that's what you want to do, you're going to have to go to some of these recreational centers or call some of the school teachers, volunteer in schools, and these types of things. There are a lot of opportunities.
Well, I'm going to ask one last question. I can't get to everybody's question. This last one is a policy question, and I'd like to ask if you to comment on it briefly. And then each of you, if you could, at 60 seconds, we're going to keep you to 60 seconds for closing comments from each of you after the last question. And this question is the policy question of, in the state of Florida, they ask what is the, why, and they refer to what the public defender has raised about the notion of who and how the decision gets made when it comes to direct filing, and in particular the notion of judicial oversight, which is done in some other jurisdictions outside of Florida. So they'd like for your comments on the process, on the thoughtful process, as to which system is better, what do you think is the better public policy, why Florida different from others, and I'll start with the public defender. He raised it earlier, and it certainly is something that several members have raised.
Part of our system is correct. I mean, obviously the decision has to be made by the state attorney as to whether the child is to be direct filed or not. I believe that there ought to be some function in place if the state attorney has made the wrong decision, where the child can petition a court to have the case reverse certified, for instance, or sent back to juvenile court. And we don't have that protection in Florida. There's no judicial oversight. There's very little criteria in the statute, and the state attorney's decision, whether it be in this circuit or any other circuit, is not reviewable by a court. And I think, personally, I believe that there ought to be some judicial oversight and some change in the law that would reflect like it is in a lot of other jurisdictions in our country.
And that's obviously it's a public policy decision. Sheriff, do you have any comments on this notion?
No, I'm going to defer to the state attorney.
First and foremost, two of the cases that many of you have commented about got indicted by grand juries. So we did have oversight from citizens just like you who heard the facts of the case, understood that the two that they indicted were 12 years old at the time, and understood that their decision to indict would put those children in adult court. They also understood the consequences of that, and the law was explained to them. So there is oversight in some of these cases. Number two, we could go to a system in some states where everybody that's 16 automatically goes to adult court. And by the way, did you know in Florida that if your child under the age of 18 commits a traffic offense, they automatically go to adult court and can get a conviction? Did you know that? Any violation of Chapter 316 or 322 automatically goes to adult court. The state attorney doesn't have to direct file anything. So if you're worried about them getting a record, look at our own statutes. And if they're old enough to be driving a car and committing a 316 or 322 offense, then I think the law pretty much assumes they should be going to adult court to handle those cases. So know your facts about the laws before you comment on them, weigh in on them, protest about them, or otherwise form your opinion. Know all of the laws and all of the factors that go into our decision to direct file. Because if you do want to go and be like those other states, we'll just send all 16-year-olds to adult court.
First, I want to thank everybody for their questions. We had lots of, I'm sorry I couldn't get to all of them. I tried to group them into categories and ask the questions that appeared to be most on the minds of some of the people here. What I'd like to do is to start in the reverse order with the judge, and if we could try to keep it to 60 seconds. And one thing's for sure, I'm not going to overrule the judge, but I am going to suggest 60 seconds for each of, and it can really be on some of this discussion tonight. Any point you'd like to stress or highlight on this very important topic of juvenile justice?
Okay, thank you. It would be less than 60 seconds. I certainly appreciate you all, your attention here this evening. It's good to know that there's this much interest in this subject. That's what I would like to leave you with, and I would ask that you share this important issue with those people in your families, your sphere of influence. Just let people know that this is a problem. It's not going away. It's been here since 1620 or so. That's when the slavery was introduced into America. That's when it started. It's been here for 400 years, and it's going to be here forever. But we're just going to have to let people know that this is a problem that can be managed. It can't be eradicated, but it is a problem that can be managed. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm just happy that we're having this discussion. This is a great discussion. There's a lot of good news about our crime in this city, in this state, and in this country. Over the last 20 plus years, as crime has been going down, it's great news. But we have to look at this, like anything else in our life, you can always do better. And so this discussion is great, that we're having a discussion of how we can improve the system. And you know, my comments are critical of how our policy in Florida. I'm not being critical of anyone up here, but just of the way we do juvenile justice in Florida. And that's what we need to focus on, is not criticizing particular people, but the way that things are done in Florida can change. It can do better. We can do better. That's all I'd say, is we can do better.
Thank you, Matt. I would simply close by reminding you of the challenge that JCCI put before us back in 2006 when they looked at murder in Jacksonville, and they said, challenge facing Jacksonville is how do we raise young boys and girls to become nonviolent young men and women. It's just that simple, and it's just that complicated. It gets to the root of our society, the family, the community, the country. For me, it all comes back to faith. We have to start teaching values again to the youth. Look, the guys that are already in the system, and most of them are guys, although women are certainly starting to change that now. But we really need to start focusing on, I think, the values that made this country great and can keep our families strong. It's all about family. Look, if everybody in here would, you know, pick one, as the judge said, look, I know in my own family that there are people in my family, extended family, that I need to work with, and I do work with. And so take care of your own first. That would be my advice in closing. Take care of your own first. Then reach out to help somebody else. And I think we'll all be a lot better off.
As your state attorney, I am committed to continuing Ed Austin's legacy of giving people a chance when they deserve that chance. A lot of times we give them a second chance. So we will continue with non-arrest diversion when it's appropriate, one of those tools being civil citations. At the other end, it's my job to protect this community, and I'm going to respectfully disagree with the judge just this once and never in court. He said these kids don't know the consequences. I respectfully disagree. They know the consequences, and they don't care. When they disobey their parents and leave the house, when they know how to work a firearm better than any of the adults in this room, when they wear masks so that they won't get caught, they're smart enough to plan these heinous and violent crimes. They know the consequences because they spend just as much time trying not to get caught. So we are very carefully sifting through the ones that we have to protect this community from, giving others a chance. What you never see and what you don't know is how often I and my lawyers waive the minimum mandatories or give withholds to make sure. You don't know how often we waive the minimum mandatories, but I do, because I'm sitting in the room across from the offender, their lawyers, their pastors, and anybody else who wants to come in and speak on their behalf. So if you ever want to know about a case, you call, you email, we'll respond. Thank you so much for all being here.
Thank you all very much. If you'll stay with me for just a second, I do want to conclude on a very positive note, and that is very positive note about tonight. I mentioned earlier that the Institute is founded on the notion, both the academic piece, but this notion of a neutral gathering place. What a positive thing in Duval County. I wish it was happening nationally, where all of us can get together in this room. I am convinced there are strong differences of opinion within this room. You saw some differences of opinion among our speakers. You heard some provocative statements and conversations. Isn't it a great thing that we can do that in this room, in this city, in this country? I think it's a very positive thing. And I also think that for those times where we do disagree, last year we had it on healthcare policy, where there is a difference on the expansion of Medicaid in Florida. And we brought in people who fundamentally disagreed. but they had a conversation about it. The worst thing we can do is not have that place. And that's why I'm hopeful that this institute will play such an important role in providing a neutral gathering place where people can disagree, where speakers can disagree, and we can do it in a way in this country in which we hear each other out. When you can get 4 elected officials, the state attorney for the 4th Judicial Circuit, the sheriff for Duval County, the public defender for the 4th Judicial Circuit, the administrative judge for the Juvenile Division, to come out on a Thursday night and spend all of this time with you, to hear them be so articulate and so passionate, even if you disagree, is a really great thing for Jacksonville, Florida. So I want to conclude tonight by thanking all of them and thanking all of you. Have a great evening.